Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. During the DVD boom of the early 2000s and the days before streaming services, companies such as Mill Creek and Alpha Video cranked out endless box sets of films that had fallen into the public domain. It was here that many horror fans first encountered such titles as The Last Man on Earth, Dementia 13, The Beast of Yucca Flats, Little Shop of Horrors, Atom Age Vampire, and even bona fide classics like George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead and Herc Harvey's Carnival of Souls. Sadly, most of these collections featured scruffy image and sound from poorly sourced materials. So while it was great to have an instant horror sci-fi movie collection for a few bucks, the films themselves were rarely given any kind of respect or care. Heck, we were lucky to have chapter stops. Happily, the good folks at Film Masters have taken it upon themselves to rescue several of these mistreated titles and give them the stand-up, high-def presentations they deserve. Or do they? That's the question we'll be asking tonight as we look at Film Masters' first two releases, Monte Hellman's feature debut, The Beast from Haunted Cave from 1959, paired with Roger Corman's Ski Troop Attack from 1960, and The Giant Gila Monster and The Killer Shrews, both from 1959 and both directed by special effects wizard Ray Kellogg. I'm thrilled to be joined tonight by another amazing panel of film fans. So let's come on in and say hello to Alan Tromp, Jon Kitley of Kitley's Crypt and Discover the Horror, and Nile Arena. And we're going to be discussing the triple feature of The Killer Shrews, The Giant Gila Monster, and Beast from Haunted Cave, all from 1959 and all from Film Masters on their brand new Blu-ray presentations. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be on board.
It's a pleasure.
Everybody, I think, got those big box sets of these public domain films. And I remember, like, a lot of them, that's where I saw them for the first time. It was like, oh, wow, I've got 50 movies, the 50 movie drive-in pack from Mill Creek. And I watched quite a number of these titles in that fashion. But as I mentioned during the introduction, they weren't the best of quality in terms of presentation. And I love the fact that Film Masters is really, kind of scooping up these orphaned films and giving them some loving care. These John, I know you've got both of these discs as well.
Yep.
And they got great commentary tracks. They got wonderful booklets inside.
Yeah, they do it. I love the fact that they're treating these films like they're Oscar-winning films, even though they're extremely low budget and can be called schlocky, but they really treat them with care. The prints look amazing. And I love that they have the respect for these films that they actually deserve.
And Alan, where did you? Let's go ahead and start with the Giant Gila Monster. We'll do Gila Monster and Killer Shrews first, and then we'll talk about Beast from Haunted Cave. Where did you encounter Giant Gila Monster for the first time?
The first time I saw it was probably on some late night shock theater package where I was, staying up that late was a real challenge, so that not only did you have to deal with the crummy prints that sometimes some of the little bargain DVD people, you had to deal with your eyes halfway closed and halfway through the film. But no, I think that I probably saw Giant Gila Monster when I was living in Ohio, and there's a chance that some horror host like Goulardi or the Ghoul presented it when I saw it for the first time.
And Niall, I know where you saw Giant Gila Monster for the first time. It was over at my place, and I didn't realize you hadn't seen it before.
That's right. Yeah. It was a real a real blind spot in my in my film education.
Was it though? Was it or was that deliberate?
Well, no. I think that I've long called them the Citizen Kane of giant bug movies. And I don't know what that makes giant Gila monster, but it's got to be. There's got to be maybe it's the like John Cassavetes shadows or John Cassavetes faces of giant lizard movies.
Yeah, it was. I remember seeing Giant Gila Monster way back in the day, and it was on one of those Mill Creek box sets. And I just remember thinking, wow, like this is not even a good monster movie, because like the monsters like always shot in like a completely, they never enter the same frame as any of the, there's only one moment where there's two, actually. There's one moment where the Gila monster interacts with the train tracks, and then there's the other moment where it interacts with the barn and the little miniature cars. But other than that, you just get these random shots of this close-up Gila monster, or a beaded lizard, as it actually is, not a Gila monster. But it is just kind of like, you know, sticking its tongue out and looking kind of bored. I was like, man, this movie's terrible. Then you listen to the commentary and you read the booklet that Film Masters put out, and you get the whole story behind the movie. And I think similar to a lot of these lower budget movies, the story behind the movie is actually more interesting than the movie itself. Both Killer Shrews and Giant Gila Monster were shot in and around the Dallas area. Alan, you sound like you know a little bit about Gordon McClendon.
Just that he was like the financier on both of these things. Am I right? And he didn't have a chain of drive-ins, and so he wanted his own material to play at those things.
He not only had the drive-in, he was huge into radio. He's the guy that invented Top 10 and as well as news radio. So he was a pretty big deal in the entertainment industry, but he also had drive-ins. So he's actually in Killer Shrews. He's one of the scientists, which is a good thing that he stayed in radio. The first time I had seen Gila Monster was on TV. And to your point, Aaron, kind of like even with some of Bird Eye Gordon stuff, when they use a real monster that's superimposed or on smaller sets, it just doesn't have that same feel. But watching it more recently, I do enjoy it more. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, but I do like how they filmed around with what they had, and they made an entertaining film.
Well, I think if he had done a little bit more, Ray Kellogg, the director, if he had done a little bit more rear projection, so that at least, you know, it looked like things were in the same frame.
Yeah.
But there's so many times where there's action happening, and then you cut over to the monster, and I think you're supposed to infer that he might be nearby, but you really have to do the work yourself. Like there's no like matching scenery or anything. It's just a random shot of a Gila monster, and then we're back to the humans again. We have to talk about Don Sullivan, and he's our lead, and he plays the nicest and the oldest teenager, you know, juvenile delinquent that you can come by.
They're not delinquents. They're hardworking. You know, they like to put their feet on things when they talk. You know, that good old American.
That one neighbor who has it in for Chase, the character Don Sullivan plays, like he just thinks he's the worst.
Yeah,
like that guy, like he's just a bad influence for him. I'm like, from where do you get any of this? That he's a bad, like he's the nicest guy around. He's got his crippled sister at home. That, you know, like his girlfriend, who's, you know, French exchange student. You know, like it's just he's just such a good guy that you're like, this guy's the troublemaker in town.
Anybody driving hot rods, they're up to something.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's that car. It's that custom car of his.
I mean, how could you think bad of anybody who just drinks soda pop at the local hangout?
Apparently, he, you know, his deal was that he was going to get to sing 3 of his songs that he'd written. There's the mushroom song, which is AKA Laugh, Little Children Laugh, that gets not 1, but 2 full presentations thereof, which is the least rock and roll song there is.
Yeah, it doesn't really fit into what they were kind of pumping it up to be.
Well, that's kind of where I go, like McClendon, you know, like he was clearly throwing hot rods and monsters and teenagers and, you know, rock and roll. It's like, but none of this is really rock and roll. You know, like this isn't what the kids are listening to, Gordy.
No.
Really, the most rocking part of the soundtrack is when, at the very end, when the truck or the hot rod full of nitro is kind of gaining on the Gila monster. Then it's like this kind of like saxophone soundtrack. That's like probably the only part where I was like, oh, this is actually sounds like some, pre-Beatles rock. The rest of it, I don't know what it is.
But there is a little snippet when they're at the the record hop where they play one of supposedly his songs, and that
Right.
is kind of a rockin' song before he does his like ukulele solo.
It's a banjolele as well.
Oh,
It's
thank God.
not even a ukulele. Like
Okay.
it is the least rock instrument there is. But our film composer is actually Jack Marshall, is the father of producer Frank Marshall, who worked with Steven Spielberg on a lot of his films. It's amazing the connections that these films have. Ray Kellogg, the director, he worked on special effects for films like Cleopatra and Tora Tora Tora. Like he built a lot of the miniatures and things like that for it. So I guess I was hoping that somebody with that background, because he worked on like 100 films in the special effects department, and it would have been nice to see him demonstrate some of that acumen here.
I think that came down to budget.
You mean he didn't have 20th Century Fox?
Well, yeah, you're not going to have the same budget for The King and I as you do for Killer Shrews for some reason. I don't know. Had he had those budgets, these films would be completely different.
Yeah.
But I think these were really just quick B movie, get him to the drive-in, and he did the best that he could with what he had. And I think a lot of these films are faulted for that, but I think there's a lot of other charm in these besides that. Or because of that, I said.
One thing that I just mentioned is growing up, the thing that actually scared me a little bit about this was not so much the Gila monster itself, was both of these have a little bit of opening narration that kind of sets the stage, and they're talking about the place or this area where it's as if God had posted this land himself, and how big the Gila monster grows there, no one knows. And then the whistling really that's throughout the soundtrack really bothered me as a kid, just made it eerie.
The explanation for the size of the Gila monster is some of the laziest pseudoscience that I think you can drag up. And even in 1959, they were still like coming up with ideas as to, just say radiation. Anybody, just say radiation. But they're like, it's the salts that may have seeped in. And also over in Russia or the Ukraine, we're not sure which, there's a 130-pound baby. And I'm like, what are you even talking about?
Right, that's the precedent. That's the calm scientific precedent. Like, well, it could be a giant Gila monster because in Russia there's that 130-pound baby. Like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Like that's the launching point of sound reason.
If you keep just rambling on and on in the narration, the viewer's like, I have no idea what he's talking about, but something big is coming. That's all I know.
That's right. We've already seen the Gila monster. Clearly something made it happen. So sure.
They call that the Criswell effect, right? It doesn't even have to be syntactically accurate. It's
one of the first scenes that you see. How did they get that shot where like you see the Gila monster's paw reaching down to the car and stuff? Did they just take a Gila monster and put a string, or is that like a little bit of a suit that somebody put on or something?
I feel like that's the one moment where Ray Kellogg's like, we got to have a paw coming down.
Yeah.
But there's also no blood found anywhere, which I'm kind of like, what does the Gila monster do? Just kind of like inhale them and
swallows them whole.
Our actress was a Miss France winner, and she was in the Miss Universe, I think, at some point. And if we zip over to Killer Shrews, we have Miss Sweden. So clearly there was also a theme going there.
Shows you how when you become Miss America or Miss Universe, man, you're just you're just going, it's all up from here.
But the Killer Shrews, again, I like this film a lot more because I feel like you have a tangible monster and they do interact with the humans. And I feel like the suspense is better handled. I like the characters more. I like the pseudoscience is a little more palatable. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I buy it. I believe these are science. It's not some sheriff, reading out of a book. I love that sorry, going back to Gila Monster. I love that the sheriff goes, hey, bring over that book you have about reptiles. And you're like, seriously? We have our producer, Ken Curtis, is playing Jerry, who's kind of our resident jerk with the shotgun, which is a new movie I'm going to make, by the way, Jerk with a Shotgun. That guy, I love the backstory on this film because learning that Ken Curtis was John Ford's son-in-law and that he'd worked with John Wayne on a ton of John Ford's films. Ray Kellogg co-directed The Green Berets with John Wayne. It's like there was a whole Duke Wayne connection around these two films. But Ken Curtis was also with the Sons of the Pioneers. I mean, it's just kind of amazing. All the little fun little factoids that surround this quiet little movie.
But he's also as Festus from Gunsmoke.
That's right. And then he went on to become Festus on Gunsmoke.
Now, I remember seeing this as a kid, so it had to have been early 70s because I remember specifically talking at school about this movie. So I love this movie. I know it gets a lot of crap because the killer shrews look like dogs wearing Jamaican outfits. I mean, with the burly hair and stuff, it looks god awful. But the puppets they use, the hand puppets, are scary as hell. Mm-hmm. The gnashing sound that they make, I think is terrifying. So when I was probably 7 or 8 when I first saw this, it's really a terrifying film. And I think it still works. Even seeing it today, you get a little leeway in some of the effects, but it's a great story. I think it's really effective, other than the fact that they seem to go to the bar every 5 minutes in that film.
Well, and I think James Best, as our lead character, he's a terrific hero, kind of anti-hero. He's a reluctant hero. James Best is probably best known for being Roscoe P. Coltrane on The Dukes of Hazzard, but he also had done a couple Twilight Zone episodes. He's a very busy TV actor, and fans of exploitation films will know him from Rolling Thunder, where he plays the mean old Texan.
One thing this thing has got going for it, just like Night of the Living Dead, this is a siege movie.
Exactly.
So it has that tension going for it. When I saw it as a kid, one of the things, and I think I've even discussed this with other horror film fans, was exactly those little puppets that they used, especially when the one comes out in the cellar and bites the hell out of one guy's leg. And as one person put it, you see all that meat hanging off of there after it's done savaging his knee. And just like John said, the sound that things made.
Yeah, it's kind of that stuttering, kind of staccato.
Chittering. If you've ever seen in the Outer Limits episode, the Xanthi Misfits, they make a sound that just terrified my mother and drove her out of the room. I think it probably would have had the same effect if she saw this movie.
Feels like it's a great siege movie. And there's actually, some echoes of Night of the Living Dead where you have, them trying to get back in the house and one of them kind of prevents the other person from getting in, and he finally gets in and knocks the guy out and is going to push him out into the horde, and I was like, I wonder if Mr. Romero saw this movie at some point, because that scene's pretty beat for beat.
I think one of the things that I always found terrifying, all the science stuff, like you mentioned, Aaron, that they go through as a kid, it means nothing. You don't relate to it. It's science talk. But when they say it has to eat its own body weight every few hours and that it eats meat, bone, flesh, everything.
Right.
Here's this 7-year-old kid going, holy crap. And they're huge now.
Well, and I was kind of paying attention to the science this time around. I'm like, wait, your scheme is to make people smaller,
right?
Is that where we're going with this? Is that everybody's just going to get on board with let's just all get smaller and then we'll eat less?
Which I thought was funny, because that's also the premise of that. I think it was universally hated by everyone but me. but that Alexander Payne film with Matt Damon, Downsizing, which was
Right, yeah.
We saw
climate
that.
change.
Mhm.
I thought it was great. It seemed like America decided we hate this so much. I don't know why. I liked it. But the other thing that I thought was interesting with that was that it was all because of the concern of overpopulation and this worry that, like, well, and it's about 9 years, 10 years before the big population bomb, at least as a book that scared everyone,
Right.
comes out. So I thought I was like, that's funny for sci-fi from the guy who co-directed the Green Berets to be ahead of the curve
Yeah.
on kind of popular discourse about what's going to happen to us as a species and as a planet. I was like, oh, I didn't expect that to be in the given circumstances of the
Yeah,
plot.
to be thinking about, like, 55 years ahead of time, where we're all absolutely going, oh yeah, overpopulation is a real problem. But then, yeah, the fact that, like, okay, so we're going to make these smaller, but we got to make these really big ones as well.
The attack of the smaller shrews just doesn't
It didn't play.
seem to work, so that let's come up with something different.
What have they been eating on this island anyway? If there's like 100 of them out there, like, I would imagine they would just mow down anything that was on that island and would have turned on themselves relatively quickly.
One thing that was even nastier was that because they tried to poison them, the poison got incorporated into their system. And so now, guess what? They're venomous too.
I love that.
Yeah, it just, and plus the fact that when our buddy Gordon gets bit, oh, I'm fine, and then immediately goes over the typewriter and starts typing his symptoms as he's dying. Man, that guy is hardcore scientist right there.
Yep. John, have you seen, actually you too, Alan, have you seen the sequel that James Best did, Return of the Killer Shrews?
No, I have not.
I wish I did not. Bruce Davidson is in it as well.
Willard?
Okay.
Yes. How they got him in there, I have no idea. They had, and John Schneider is in it too from Dukes of Hazzard.
Right.
The CGI is so horrible. It takes place on the same island. James Best plays the same character. I went into this thinking this is going to be so cool and so fun. It is horrible. But I have heard, now I haven't seen it, but I have heard that the remake of Gila Monster that I think Jim Wynorski did was actually supposed to be pretty good.
And I'll mention this as well. Back in the 80s when they came out with all those books like The Ants, The Dogs, all these nature attacks paperbacks that you used to get, Gila was one of them. So it's well represented, which is good because the only time I'd ever heard of a Gila monster before I saw this movie was one showed up in an episode of the Johnny Quest Hanna-Barbera cartoon. So that, see, it's your biology lesson right there.
Was it dangerous?
Yeah, it almost bit the dog Bandit.
I'm glad you said almost. I would have been up all night.
Almost, yes.
Let us jet forward to our second disc, which features Beast from Haunted Cave, which, again, I think the story behind this one is just fascinating. It was directed by Monte Hellman and produced by Gene Corman, who's Roger's brother. But they had grown tired of shooting around Bronson Canyon, and so they took off for the Black Hills of South Dakota, which I believe is your birthplace, John.
Near there. I was born near there, yes. Even though I don't recall because we moved when I was young. So I've been there, just have no clue of it. But I would love to go back to find the cave.
I was just, and it's apparently like it's an old mine, like an old gold mine, Broken Boot gold mine.
Yeah. Yeah, this one, and it's also written by Charles B. Griffith, who wrote a ton of Corman's earlier stuff. I did not see this up until I think Synapse released it on DVD years ago. And that was my first experience with it. And again, it's one of those things like, why have I not seen this before? Because I think it's a really well-made film. I love anytime you get an original looking monster, I'm all for it. And this thing is like nothing you've ever seen before.
Well, and I think what's nice is that you can actually see it now, whereas in some of the public domain prints, I was like, what is that? Of course, now that you can see, you're still kind of like, what is that? It's got kind of like weird spider, spider arms. It's got like a telepathic link to one of the criminals. Well, the setup for this is that we've got a group of criminals who are planning to knock over one of the safe houses, I guess, where the gold is stored from the Broken Boot gold mining. And then there's our hero, who is supposed to be taking them across country to a ski lodge where they will be met by a plane and flown off to Jamaica or wherever they're going to spend their ill-gotten gains. They blow up the mine that's going to be kind of a diversion to send the cops that away while they break into the vault. In setting the charges for the explosion, they awaken the beast from Haunted Cave, which I love the fact that everybody knows it's Haunted Cave. Like,
No, how do you feel about a haunted cave? We could go there. I think one of the characters says, when they're trying to escape, like,
Yep.
oh yeah, well there's that haunted cave. We can go there.
Well, and I was confused. Is the mine and the cave, are they two different places?
Because connected.
Yeah, they are.
Because if so, then like that beast left his mine and became the beast from Haunted Cave. Because before that, he was just the beast of Broken Boot gold mine, and then he became the beast from Haunted Cave. But yeah, he after that guy sets the charge, leaves his girlfriend there to get blown up and or eaten. The monster is kind of pursuing him across the country, which I think is bizarre.
And bizarre that nobody sees it at any point.
Well, at one point it's see-through. So
and maybe with its white, with the snow, it just blends right in.
It's camouflaged. Exactly.
Yep.
But I really liked this movie as well. I like the fact that it kind of combines the crime heist drama with a monster movie. And as you said, John, the monster is completely unique. It was kind of made, and our person who created it, Christopher Robinson. This was his way of getting into movies. They hired him. They think they gave him $200 or something to make the movie, or $20. It was somewhere between $20 and $200. And they said, if you can make a monster, because they called Paul Blaisdell and said, can you make a monster for this amount of money? And Paul's like, no. And if Paul Blaisdell says he can't make this monster, you're in trouble.
Yep.
I think about that time he had probably either close to retiring or was just fed up with the AIP way of doing things.
One of the things I love about any Corman movie, really any movie, kind of on the independent circuit, whether it's a genre film, is the pseudo beatnik. And this movie had it in spades. Oh, just that dialogue. A Bucket of Blood has it a lot too. A lot of the early Corman, kind of films have it too. But this one, it was just delicious. This every single line could be a Corso or a Ginsberg or a Kerouac, a line, kind of ham-fisted through hard-boiled dialogue. And the two kind of, extraneous, extra henchmen, Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones, whatever the alias is, their kind of patter with each other in the bar the day before the heist or when they're prepping for it is just as great as it gets as far as that pre-60s peak. It's the patois of the outcast, it's the patois of the misfit, and of course that means it's also the patois of the criminal. What is it? There's that movie where Peter Falk plays a beatnik who realizes the greatest thrill of all is murder, by the director, I think, of The Mask.
The Bloody Brood, or
the
something.
Bloody Brood. The Bloody Brood. It reminded me of that as well. We're just of course, the most evil figure of all is also the most kind of beat poet, unrealized beat poet. Just every line of theirs is something that Neil Cassidy could have written.
I've kind of got a really soft spot in my heart for this movie because when I was little, my folks were nice enough to give me a little black and white TV set to put in my room. So one night, one Friday or something, I couldn't sleep. So I turned on the TV 2 a.m. or something, and I started watching it, and this was on. But I missed the opening titles. So and I'm watching this thing in horror, because it was very frightening, as a young kid. And so and the next day, I asked my folk, and I was even drawing pictures of the monster, and it had all those whip-like arms and that webbing all over it and stuff. And for a long time, I could not find a reference in books about this film. I don't think they had anything written up on it. And Ed Nahas from was it Screams to Screen and things.
Yeah.
Finally, I found out what it was, and now everybody knows about it. It was a mystery for me for a long time.
Well, and I think the acting is really solid. I think the acting is
Yeah.
solid. As you said, Niall, the script is just so kind of like fantastically arch and strange. I love how the gangster and his mall call each other Charles. And, the director, Monte Hellman, he would go on to do things like Cockfighter and Two Lane Blacktop. So even though he's really working up against it, on clearly with minimal resources, there's a real handling of the actors and atmosphere, and it's a really fun. It's a perfect example of like somebody coming out of the Corman factory, where it's like, if you have some talent, you won't have to work for me again. And it's unfortunate that Monte Hellman never kind of enjoyed the same success as somebody like Coppola or Scorsese or other folks who started under the Corman banner.
I'm amazed that Corman and them decided to go to South Dakota.
Yeah,
because in the middle of winter,
they drove to South Dakota.
That could not have been pleasant to film there. I mean, the whole process of making films in South Dakota in that winter is just unbelievable that they would make that decision. But the fact that they did, and they cranked out these two films pretty much back to back, you would never know. I mean, they still turned out a really high quality product. Like you said, the characters are real, very stereotypical to a degree on some of them, with the bad guys and the good guys, completely black and white. But I think they really turned out a really good movie. And also Chris Robinson, the guy that did the effects, that's the main star from William Griffith's Stanley as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he did go on to do a little bit bigger budget.
Well, yeah, he worked a lot actually.
Yeah,
Chris Robinson, once he got his start. But yeah, I agree. Like, everybody who talks about this film, talks about the filming of it, talks about how cold it was that winter. And again, everything I always hear about South Dakota is just how miserable it is in the wintertime. So the idea that you're going to go there and shoot in the snow, and also apparently, well, I mean, you don't really get a sense of the grandeur of the Black Hills, really. I mean, they might as well have been shooting in Bronson Canyon, except for the snow.
Oh, as you're saying that is one scene that I thought was particularly effective, is the fair-haired girl from the bar and the mall Gypsy says, I was a fair-haired girl once. But when the monster is not satisfied just to drink his fill, but to take the lady with him as a food supply and webbing her stuck in the fork of a tree.
Yes.
And then the one gangster, Marty, sees her, open his eyes at him. That was really effective, I thought.
Well, and I think the same is true when like Small Dove gets captured and taken to the cave. You have that same thing of like, one of the gangsters who, it's the unlikeliest romance, but he's trying to free her, and he gets attacked.
He likes that hefty old squaw. Yeah. Yeah. And tied to that, you guys know my friend Barry York. In this film, he says one of the things that's the most disturbing to him is the way the creature moves its head. It's kind of this wobbly thing, especially when it's drinking its fill of its victims.
Well, something that was pointed out to me, it may have been in Bill Warren's Keep Watching the Skies, but the fact that our good guy doesn't actually kill the monster here. Like, our good guy just kind of like shows up, but it's really Marty who kind of avenges, this monster who's been tracking him down. Like, they kind of have their mano a mano, and you're like, oh, that's right. The good guy just basically, shows up and doesn't get killed.
So does anybody know how similar Ski Troop Attack is to this? Or like you said, it's got some of it. Does it have like most of the cast? Does Gypsy show up in the cast of Ski Troop Attack?
Gypsy does not show up, but Frank Wolf, who's our gangster character, he's there. Michael Forrest, who plays Gil, the ski instructor, he's in there. I think maybe Marty, Richard Sinatra. Can't remember if he's in there or not, but it was released the following year. So I don't know if Corman was just taking a little more time with the editing or just rolling it out at a different time. Why it wasn't
Sinatra
released.
is in there.
Sinatra's in there as well. Okay.
Written again by Charles B. Griffith. So, and it's a small cast, and again, you're filming out in the middle of nowhere, and you're making a war movie. But from what I read, Corman or the story is a little bit more gritty than one would think. And I want to say and I may be getting this mixed up with another movie, but I think it's supposed to be similar to The Dirty Dozen, even though this came out before The Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, even before the book, I think.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be a gritty war film.
Yeah, I'm excited to check it out. I have not had the opportunity to, but I'm excited to see how it plays. Right,
Corman's actually in it.
Is he?
Really?
Yeah, plays a soldier, German soldier.
Cool. Any final thoughts on Beast from Haunted Cave?
It's worth watching. Definitely worth watching. All three of these are.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and as I said at the beginning, I'm just super psyched that like this has become kind of Film Masters' mission is to present these films, you know, whether you think they're deserving or not, they're being given a fair shot to be appreciated by a new audience.
One other thing that I will mention about Beast of Haunted Cave, I think it has a lot of the same soundtrack music as Attack of the Giant Leeches, which I thought was a pretty darn scary, effective score.
Yeah, also the same year. Okay, so actually, I do have to ask one quick question because a lot of these films that were made by Film Group, which was Corman's, kind of offshoot from AIP, how did they fall into public domain with Corman being kind of the sound businessman that he is? Like, how did that happen?
I'm not sure either, other than maybe since this was in the early Corman days, maybe he wasn't as shrewd as he became later.
It's such a weird, like that all of them lapsed. And I don't know if he made a deal at some point, like, hey, I'll trade you the rights for this in exchange for X, but it's one of those things where I'm like, wow, like all of these, like Little Shop of Horrors and Bucket of Blood and all of those ones that were made by Film Group have kind of fallen into this public domain where they show up on all the box sets.
Yep. The Wasp Woman.
Yep.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I do want to say one other thing about Film Masters and what they're doing. If you go to their website, they have a little trailer, like on what they're doing and their upcoming projects and stuff. And they have 3 different words that come up. It says preservation, restoration, and then celebration. And I think that just epitomizes what they're trying to do. And as a film fan, tells you that they are celebrating. Most people would think of Killer Shrews or these type of films or schlock, and they need to be on these 50 disc sets that look like crap, but they're taking it to the next level of treating these things with care and love and to be celebrated. And I think that's amazing when someone does that extra work for that.
Well, they're doing kind of the opposite of what MST did for them. MST3K kind of said, these are bad movies to be made fun of. And Film Masters is saying, these are movies that deserve to be seen and appreciated. And if you want to laugh at them, that's fine, but they deserve a shot. And I think kind of like when MST3K is presenting it, they're presenting it as a bad movie or a movie that is substandard and deserving of your mockery. And Film Masters is saying, nope, you should watch it and you should appreciate it and see what you think.
Yep.
I was interested in looking through the Keep Watching the Skies book about Beast from Haunted Cave. Apparently it had a nickname. The monster was like Humphras.
Yes, Humphras.
Humphras. Wow, that's different.
That's right. He was made from like, spun glass and Christmas angel hair. And it was over like a kind of a little wood and fiberglass frame. I mean, Robinson made this thing for nothing. And he's the monster. He's the one playing the monster as well. But he did that in exchange to get his SAG card. He's like, I'll play this monster. You got to give him my SAG card. And he got it. So
people have done worse things.
Paying the dues.
Intriguing monster. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. great celebrating these 3 films with you all, and looking forward to chatting in the future. Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.